The movie begins with Lucas and Roy watching a news report about themselves. The reporters claim they've captured a boy and are on the run. Lucas has taped up the windows with cardboard and covered the door's peephole with duct tape. Roy decides they need to leave and immediately goes to the bedroom Alton was reading a comic book with a flashlight. Then, Lucas grabs their bags while Roy carries Alton out to the car. Meanwhile, they drive out of the motel parking lot. The receptionist notices them and calls the police to report their car. Later, Lucas and Roy hear on the police radio that their car has been identified. Lucas quickly takes an exit, turns off the headlights, and puts on night vision to drive in the dark without being seen in order to avoid risk. In another place, 3 men are also watching the news about Roy and Alton. Their leader, Calvin, tells the other guy that they have only 4 days to find the boy and bring him back. The leader steps into the next room, takes his place behind a podium, and speaks to a crowd of people. He recites strange scriptures and presents them to the audience. Meanwhile, agents from the federal governments surround the building. Interrupting the speech, the agents briefly speak with Calvin at the podium. He calmly suggests his followers to listen them carefully. Then the agents announce that they have a warrant to search the entire ranch and detain all the members. Everyone living there will be taken to Jefferson High School, where they will be questioned for further investigation. Meanwhile, Lucas is driving when he curves to avoid a car, but another vehicle crashes the cat. He stops to check on the driver, which is a woman who is unconscious. Then a police officer arrives, and Lucas tells him to call an ambulance. But the officer recognizes them from the news. The police officer attempts to take out his gun, then Lucas is forced to shoot the officer to escape. Before leaving, he quickly uses his radio to report the injured officer and the woman, making sure help is on the way. Then they drive off immediately. While they are on their way, Roy reassures Alton that everything is fine. On the other side, the people from the ranch are taken off the buses and led into the school building. They are given stacks of paperwork to fill out. Agent Miller and Paul Savior from the NSA question Calvin. They ask him about the scriptures and where the information comes from. Calvin admits he wrote them, but says all the knowledge came from Alton Meyer and admits that he adopted Alton. Paul tells him the scriptures contain classified government secrets. Calvin explains that Alton would sometimes speak in a strange language which are words of Lord, and they would record his words. Afterward, Roy and Lucas arrive at Eldon's house. Eldon, a former member of the ranch, knows both Roy and Alton and wants to help. He shows a room ready for Alton, who goes straight to bed. Roy helps Elliot to take out his goggles and leaves the room. Later, Eldon tries to talk to Roy about the progress he's made with the coordinates from the ranch's scriptures. But Roy, exhausted, says he can't deal with it right now and mentions that he is tired. The next morning, the house shakes violently. Roy and Lucas rush to Alton's room and find Eldon staring into Alton's glowing eyes. A beam of light connects them, and the walls begin to crack. Without hesitation, Roy grabs a lamp and knocks Eldon out. A strong light streams into the room, making Alton's eyes flash uncontrollably. Roy quickly moves him into the shadows, holding him until he calms down. Meanwhile, Paul continues questioning members of the ranch, trying to understand their connection to Alton. He learns that Alton can project a visible spectrum of light from his eyes, showing people visions and giving them a deep sense of peace, and realizes that by Friday, March 6th, Alton must be with them for everything to be all right. The people Paul questions are certain that Friday, March 6th is their judgment day. They believe all will be well as long as Alton is back before then. Meanwhile, the agents decide to end the questioning. Everyone is loaded back onto the buses and taken to the ranch. As soon as they arrive, 2 men, Doak and Levi, break away from the group. They head to a hidden compartment inside one of the buildings, retrieve a backpack, and speed off in a pickup truck. Roy and Lucas prepare to leave Eldon's house. For a moment, Roy considers shooting Eldon before taking his van, but he changes his mind. As they drive, Lucas notices that Alton looks weaker, but Roy insists he's fine. Suddenly, Alton starts speaking in Spanish. When they turn on the radio, they realize he's repeating the exact words of a talk show host. Later, they decide to stop at a gas station. Roy also needs to use a payphone. They leave Alton in the car, but he senses something above and steps out into the parking lot. Roy glances outside and sees Alton standing there, a woman approaching him. He immediately hangs up the phone and runs over, quickly sending the woman away. Frustrated, he scolds Alton. Then Roy apologizes. Alton does the same and then gestures to the sky. Flaming debris begins falling, striking the ground around them. Roy doesn't hesitate. He scoops up Alton and rushes back to the car, where Lucas is waiting. As they drive away, Alton gets a nosebleed. Roy gently comforts him. Eventually, they arrive at Sarah's house, Alton's mother. She welcomes them warmly, bringing them inside and showing Alton some toys she bought for him. That night, she tucks him into bed. When she leaves his room, she finds Lucas and Roy waiting. They discuss Alton's condition. Lucas argues that he needs a hospital, but Roy refuses, saying they have to reach their destination in 3 days. Sarah, after some thought, agrees with Roy. The next day, FBI agents gather in the gas station parking lot, assessing the damage. Paul is informed that a military satellite designed to detect nuclear activity was pulled out of orbit. The debris that fell was from that satellite. Meanwhile, Sarah strikes up a conversation with Lucas. Lucas explains that he wasn't part of the ranch. He and Roy were childhood friends until his parents moved there. He hadn't seen Roy in years until one day, Roy showed up at his door with Alton, asking for help. Then Lucas explains that Alton's eye is so powerful. At night, Sarah questions Alton about what happened at the gas station. Alton calmly explains that he pulled the satellite out of orbit on purpose because police were looking for him, which was being used to track him. Back at Sarah's house, Doak and Levi search for clues. They don't see her car outside but find the van instead. Unexpectedly, Alton suddenly starts choking and coughing. A bright light bursts from his eyes so intense that it triggers nearby car alarms. They quickly pull over. Then Alton crawls out of the car and fails in the ground. The ground around him withers and dies. Catching his breath, he warns them that they're being followed. He tells Sarah and Lucas to take the car to a hotel while he and Roy travel on foot through the woods to meet them there. Roy carries Alton through the dense forest until they come across a small cave with a stream of water. Alton lies down, exhausted. Roy suggests they stay and wait for nightfall, but Alton shakes his head, saying he's ready to be in the sunlight. Meanwhile, back at his office, Paul studies the church's sermons. He marks the coordinates on a map and compares them with locations tied to Alton's past incidents. With this, he pinpoints where Alton is headed and alerts the team. Elsewhere, Doak and Levi arrive at Eldon's house, having tracked the van's registration. They press him for information about Alton. Under pressure, he is forced to give them some details. The next day, Roy and Alton step into a clearing in the woods just as the sun begins to rise. At first, the sunlight is painful for Alton, he cries out, his eyes flashing uncontrollably. But then his whole body erupts in light, forming a glowing dome around them. Later, they return to the hotel where Sarah and Lucas are waiting. Alton, now looking completely restored, explains what he saw, a world layered on top of their own, filled with people like him. He believes that's where he belongs. As he speaks, his hands and arms start to glow. They gather their things to leave, but as Lucas steps outside, gunfire erupts. Doak and Levi attack them, restraining Lucas and Roy before storming into the hotel room to capture Sarah and take Alton. Sarah fights back, makes herself free. She rushes outside, untying Lucas and Roy. Without wasting a second, they grab their things and jump into the car, determined to chase down the truck carrying Alton. But as they hit the highway, they run straight into a massive traffic jam. Then, Roy steers the car onto the shoulder, speeding past the long line of traffic. But before they get far, military personnel block their way, ordering them back onto the road. With no other choice, they wait in the jam. Afterward, helicopters fly overhead. Nearby, they spot the abandoned truck that Doak and Levi were driving. That's all the confirmation Roy needs. Alton is now in government custody. Inside a stark white observation room, Alton sits alone in a chair. On the other side of a large glass panel, Paul and several FBI agents watch a live feed of him. They attempt to question him, but Alton stays silent. He only agrees to speak to Paul and only if they're alone. Reluctantly, the other agents leave. Once they're gone, Alton freezes the live feed of himself sitting in the chair. At the same time, the locked door between him and Paul clicks open. Paul hesitates, then steps inside. Alton looks at him and calmly says that he belongs in another world, and he needs Paul's help to get there. Then, Alton's eyes begin to glow, locking Paul in his gaze. Meanwhile, Roy, Lucas, and Sarah stand in a parking lot feeling hopeless. Suddenly, every payphone around them starts ringing. Roy hesitates, then picks one up. On the other end is Paul. He introduces himself and explains that he has Alton and he wants to give him back. Paul quickly gives Roy a set of coordinates for their meeting spot, then destroys the phone after hanging up. Then, Alton casually unlocks and starts a nearby car as if it's the easiest thing in the world. Later, in a private spot in the woods, they all meet. Paul hands Alton back to them and asks if he can come along, but Roy and the others say no. Understanding the risk he's taking, Paul locks himself in Lucas's handcuffs to make it look like he had no choice in letting Alton go. Under an overpass, Sarah and Alton put on bulletproof vests. They climb into the car, knowing their final destination is ahead, but so are multiple roadblocks. As they approach one of the checkpoints, Roy tells Sarah and Alton to get down in the back seat. Then, without hesitation, he drives straight through the road spikes, speeding past the soldiers. The car's airbags deploy, but Roy keeps going. Further down the road, they finally pull over. Catching their breath, Sarah and Alton leap out of the car and sprint into the woods. Meanwhile, Roy and Lucas speed away, military vehicles in pursuit. Sarah and Alton reach a clearing. Alton steps into the center, his eyes glowing. The ground trembles beneath them. Then, suddenly, massive futuristic buildings and structures appear hidden all along, now revealed under a flickering dome of light. Ghostly beams move through the forest, slowly taking shape as people. They belong to Alton's world. As they approach, Alton smiles. Meanwhile, Roy and Lucas push their car to its limits, but it eventually gives out. They crash, the vehicle flipping over, leaving both men trapped inside. Back in the clearing, Alton turns to Sarah. He says goodbye. Then, in a flash of light, he vanishes along with the rest of his world. Soldiers soon arrive at the crash site, pulling Roy and Lucas from the wreck, taking them into custody. Later, agents interrogate Lucas, pressing him for Sarah and Alton's whereabouts. He insists he doesn't know. Frustrated, they send in Paul, who acts like they've never met. Meanwhile, at a gas station, Sarah chops off her hair in a bathroom mirror. She changes her clothes, preparing to disappear. Roy stands alone in his prison cell, wires strapped to his head. As he gazes out over the yard, a familiar glow flickers in his eyes, proof that Alton's world never truly left him. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed the video. Watch the next recaps on the screen and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.